It's funny. I saw a similar video like this yesterday, and I was like, yeah, Jamal Bowman, I can tell why you're, angry and annoyed in all of this, especially in the case of Joe Manchin. And, for me, I like it when these guys get somewhat aggressive and when these guys make their point known about going after this person or that person that is standing in the way of them trying to get something accomplished. So this isn't something that, I'm all that bothered by, like talking about when Jamal Bowman goes after or puts a knife in Joe Manchin. Joe Manchin, of anybody, is definitely somebody that deserves to have a knife put in him. And I mean that purely in the political sense. Joe Manchin has gotten far too big for his britches. And part of that was allowed when Joe Biden, or for that matter, the lefties in the House, basically allowed Joe Manchin to run the table, to call the shots, to be the big shot, to be the guy who would go in a heartbeat and say, I am not voting for this. I am not supporting that. I don't have anything to do with that. That bill is going to die if you send that bill to the Senate. And Joe Manchin has no compunction about it at all. Doesn't matter, doesn't hurt him, doesn't bother him at all. When it came down to stopping and putting a knife in the COVID bill, he had no issue with shooting the COVID bill in the face if it kept the $15 an hour. How dare you try to give these American workers $15 an hour? How dare you do that? Those workers in West Virginia are not worth $15 an hour. As such, I am going to ensure that the COVID bill that they're saying is an emergency that needs to be passed immediately will not pass as long as you are trying to give and ensure that the American worker gets $15 an hour. My name is Joe Manchin. In that position, full of holes, full of capability to attack and diminish and undermine, was allowed to stand. Was allowed to stand. Joe Biden goes to a food bank. And at the food bank, he's talking to an African-American woman and a kid. And in this kind of heartfelt moment that they can get on TV, where they can lavish in the pain of somebody who is poor or who is unfortunate and who Joe Biden can get a good video clip of that engagement. If that person had gotten her $1,400 check that was supposed to be $2,000, and if that $1,400 check came as opposed to Joe Manchin preventing the bill, maybe she wouldn't have been at that food bank. Maybe Joe Biden would have never ran into it in the first place. Maybe the indignity of having to go somewhere and to get food in this kind of quote unquote handout way, something that our society on some level frowns upon. And as it frowns upon it, it does something to the individual to have to even do it. Joe Manchin basically put this woman in a position where she had to go to that food bank and get that food in order to feed her kid, because the check didn't go through the mail because he didn't believe that the American worker, including her, was worth $15 an hour. But that position was not assailed. The progressives, who finally got $15 an hour on the marquee, who had the potential, first time, only time, to get that over the finish line, had a president who said, yes, I am for it, had a House that passes it, and had Manchin in the Senate to just say no. And instead of the House having that fight, what the House did was just take out the 15 and called it a win. When Donald Trump was trying to pass $1.8 trillion, what did Nancy Pelosi do? Stonewall the passage of the bill. It is politically advantageous for her to do that because she wants Trump to lose, and not just wants Trump to lose, she wants her party to be able to dictate what that bill looks like. And if you pass that $1.8 trillion under Trump, you're not going to get the opportunity necessarily to do it under Biden. Not to mention, you don't want Trump getting a win just before the election. And what a win is having him pass legislation. They stonewalled him. What is it? $1.8 trillion. Great. But if you're willing to stonewall Trump for 3 months, then why does it all of a sudden become this infinite urgency now, or at the time where the 15 was taken out of it? Arbitrary. That's the point that I'm making. Bowman, AOC, all of these people decided to be team players, to have coalition and collective uniting with the Democratic Party in the House, even when that meant getting rid of one of their main and key policy proposals, like $15 an hour. When are you ever going to get that on the marquee again? How many people put money in your pocket that wasn't making $15 an hour, but did it because they believed you when you said you were going to go to Congress and you were going to burn this shit down in order to get $15 an hour. What I don't even want is you on Twitter bitching about it later when you didn't do it. You had the potential to do this. All of you had the potential to do this. In the same way that Joe Manchin, one guy, solitary, could say, I'm done, I'm not going to do this, fuck all to the American worker, and will leave 42% of the public making $18,000 a year. Basically, what they were making before COVID. 42%. Half of your world, of your country, poor. Half of your country poor. And the progressives that were put in Congress that were supposed to be the ones who were fighting against us, that were fighting for America, that loved America so much and their constituents so much that they were willing to burn it down and take these dinos out who have been there for 20, 30 years that weren't doing their jobs. That's why you were put into Congress. That's why. Not for Twitter spats, not to go on Joy Ann Reid and to bitch and moan about the Democratic Party and Joe Manchin and the Senate. You had the capability of doing something in the House and you didn't do it. But now, Twitter, YouTube, spots where you make your complaints, where you make your bitching and your moaning and your attacking of Joe Manchin. Yes, you should have attacked Joe Manchin. But secondary and more important than an attack of your Joe Manchin is also the capabilities that you have in the House. And you weren't put there in that House to go along, to get along. You got in that House with the idea of being opposition. You were going to be marginalized. You were going to be pushed to the edges of that. But you go into it knowing that. What did you think was going to happen when you got in Congress saying you want $15 an hour, or you want Medicare for all, or for that matter, you want to expand Social Security or the PRO Act? What did you think was going to happen? If they were for it, do you think they would have already passed it? Meaning your go along to get along nonsense basically not only allowed Joe Biden to get a pass on legislation that he said he was going to pass that was a starvation wage, but to even give him cover on top of it with the idea that the House is united, that the progressives are backing Joe Biden's agenda, that the progressives are in league and in line with Biden and the words that he is saying without any capability at all in getting any of it over the finish line. I get Jamal Bowman's anger, frustration. But I suspect some of that is coming from you feeling like an asshole right now. You saw one man in the Senate being willing, capable, with all of the ego necessary to kill a piece of legislation by himself. You, having none of the capabilities of doing something similar, despite the fact that you had enough, 2 or 3 of you in the House, to do it if you cared that much about it. You had the potential to get 15 over the finish line, or at the very least, impart a vicious cost to the president that said it was a starvation wage, and either force that president to repudiate that $15 an hour, something that would have a cost, which should have a cost associated with it if you're going to use something like that to get elected, or you give it a pass, and in this case, you just gave it a pass. And now, anger and frustration, bitterness, resentment. That rage should have been the thing that got you and some of the other members to refuse to pass that bill without that $15 an hour being attached, knowing full well that there is no other capacity to get that over the finish line. And if it died there, it was just going to stay dead. You are now going after and angry at Joe Manchin about H.R. 1. Fact is, Joe Manchin has been killing a lot of the policies that you've wanted over the course of the past several months. They've just never been brought up for a vote because Joe Manchin was going to kill it even before it started. What I suggest to you is you learn from him. For you not to be on here yelling and bitching and moaning and everything else, but you learned. You get the level of ego that he has at his disposal. You figure out what you need to do or who you need to represent to give you the power, the energy, the dexterity, and the forcefulness necessary to be able to stand singularly and say, I am fighting for America. And in fighting for America, it is not something that we would allow to go forward of people making the starvation wage. Those people were out there ensuring that we had food delivered to our houses, that those factories stayed open, and they put their lives on the line for it. And the president said it was a starvation wage if they weren't making $15 an hour. Now, Bowman, believes we need this COVID bill, but it is not something that I would allow to go through if it is indeed not going to ensure that those heroes have at least enough to feed themselves. If a company cannot pay a living wage, then the company should exist. That's what I want Bowman to say. But that's what I wanted Bowman to say back then when the $15 an hour was up on the marquee and they had the capacity and the number of votes to kill that COVID bill in the exact same way that Manchin was willing to kill it. And you bring that fight about a $15 an hour to the surface. If Manchin and the other Democrats want to go out there and fight and say that the American workers are not worth 15, let them. Have that fight. Have that ping pong back between the Senate and between the House, where the House is fighting and yelling and screaming that the president said he wanted this. And let the Senate defend itself. Let the president be put into a position where the president needs to make a choice, or whether to repudiate everything that he had said leading up to the campaign trail, or being put into a position where he's forced to act. You are not there to be buddy-buddy with the other Democrats. You are there to change things. That's not what this looks like. I don't care about the theatrics. I don't care that you're on Joanne Reed. What I care about is when you had the opportunity to actually accentuate your power in the space to which you are given those powers, meaning Congress. What I care about is that you didn't do it. You can come on Joanne Reed and bitch and moan. We already have the Young Turks who do the performative nonsense while working with the Democratic Party. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for people who are going to represent their interests, not just on television when a camera is in front of you, but when there isn't a camera on you, when you're there about to make that vote, and you have all of these Mama Bear, Nancy Pelosi, some of these other Democrats that have an expectation for you to fall in line and do the job that they want you to do, and the care, the concern of your constituents, of the larger America that you know should not be making that wage, should matter and suffice more. That's not what happened. Jamal Bowman complaining on Joanne Reed. Welcome to the Soapbox.
It has evolved into a system where corporate-backed actors and the wealthy elite are literally controlling Congress. The reason why they don't support H.R. 1 is not just the voting rights piece. That's a big piece, and that's very important. And we want to pass it retroactively so we could supersede what's happening at the state level. But H.R. 1 also gets big money out of politics and pushes to publicly finance elections. So I am one of a few Democrats who we do not take corporate PAC money because we don't want to be beholden to corporations. We want to be beholden to our constituents, the people that we are supposed to serve. Joe Manchin and many others are no longer beholden to their constituents. They're beholden to the Koch brothers. They're beholden to the Chamber of Commerce, and they're beholden to the wealthy elite overall who have control of our democracy. This is why we can't pass a $15 minimum wage. This is why we can't pass common sense gun control laws. This is why we can't pass common sense immigration reform. We are not allowed to evolve into the multiracial democracy that we are because white supremacy has its tentacles around Congress in the form of wealth inequality and the wealthy elite controlling our Congress. Another thing, corporations within our system are considered people and money is considered free speech. That is insane. That is the system that we are currently operating within. And Joe Manchin, while he speaks to being, holier than thou and upholding our democracy and looking to save it, he's really upholding a system of white supremacy through wealth inequality, through people like the Koch brothers.
Joe Manchin is maintaining a system of wealth inequality, And I'm sorry. And as such, let's see. And as such, he is going after Joe Manchin because of such. Look, it's not that he's wrong. It's not that he's wrong. It's just, yeah, it's not that he's wrong. It's just, these are words. And it's not that these words are wrong. It's more so that I care less about the words. The reason we don't have $15 an hour is because there was nobody in the House to fight for $15 an hour. That's why. That had nothing to do with Republicans. That had everything to do with the Democrats in the House, not the Senate. Yes, Joe Manchin is problematic. And yes, Joe Manchin decided, fuck all, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do any of this stuff. I don't want to do it, so I'm not going to do it. And whatever reasons Joe Manchin have at his disposal, fair enough. But let's just be very clear. The House accepted the Senate's pass. The House passed the COVID bill without the $15 an hour. The House decided to do that. The House decided that it didn't want to have a fight on that very specific issue, that it just wanted to give in. And I'm of the mind that they never decided to put the 15. That the 15 was there entirely just for various people can vote on it, knowing full well that when it came back, they were going to get rid of it. They knew it. AOC, Bowman, Rashid Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, the members of what they were considering the squad, had enough votes to do the exact same thing that Joe Manchin did. They chose not to do that. And in choosing not to do that, killed any notion of $15 an hour going over the finish line. Yes, your world and your life could be easier if Joe Manchin would have said, okay, I'll pass the $15 an hour. But you got into Congress knowing full goddamn well that the Democratic Party was not for the $15 an hour, which is the reason you ran for Congress in the first place. I get your anger. I get the reason you're annoyed. But I am annoyed that you're annoyed considering when the opportunity came up, you guys folded. You guys utterly and entirely folded. I mean, for God's sake, yes, Bowman, you're absolutely right in what you're saying. You're absolutely right. And what you're saying in regards to your attacks on Manchin, he's not representative of his constituents, all that good stuff. Yes, that is very true. Manchin is terrified that he's going to be taken out on a rail. Manchin doesn't want to get rid of the filibuster because at that point he loses the excuse that he has not to pass any of this legislation that he doesn't necessarily believe in. Anyway, so when you get down to brass tacks, if Manchin, or for that matter, some of the Senate Republicans are going to keep putting the kibosh on bills that you pass through, then why are you not willing to have a larger fight over some of those bills and not just go along to get along? Do you really honestly and truly believe that your constituents put you in that office to go along and get along? And having these flare-ups on Twitter and on YouTube and whatever else are good, of course. It gets your message out and it gets your point across. By the same token, I care more about other things. And one of those other things is a 15. And yes, I am even of mind that if it meant withholding or holding the COVID bill hostage in the same way that Joe Manchin was holding the COVID bill hostage in regards to this kind of fight over what you guys are going to pass, that not just would have been necessary or mandated, it would have been right, especially given your own political leanings. 40 million people don't make $15 an hour. That in and of itself is problematic and is horrible. You would have been able to change the lives of tens of millions of human beings. And yes, it would have been a political fight. And yes, it would have been a back and forth. But yes, that should have been a political fight you guys were willing to have. Powered by the 600,000 that died. Powered by the 33 million people that have been affected. Powered by all of those people that lost their businesses or their jobs. Or for that matter, their livelihoods. All of that stuff should have been enough energy and drive for you to angrily excoriate anybody that was going to stand in the way of getting that accomplished. Maybe it's because you're a new congressman. Maybe being new, you didn't necessarily have the confidence that would have been necessary for you to do that. The thing to say, fuck all, I'm going to let the shit burn down unless I get the agenda that my constituents sent me here to accomplish. At which point does the go along to get along stop? At which point Because we're just going to go along with the Democratic Party. We're not going to care about the issue of justice and getting those. Not going to care about that. We're just going to go along. When does that stop? When does it stop? Twitter beefs, complaining on Twitter, complaining on YouTube, going on talk shows. All those things are nice. And yes, you're going to get a lot of people who say, yes, Bowman, get him. What matters is brass tacks. When the moment comes, and when you're presented with choice, and you're presented with consequential choice of doing X or Y, of being a team player, or functioning on behalf of this notion of justice, or for that matter, functioning in the way that your constituents sent you there to function, not entirely to just be this team player to go along and get along, pushing through inadequate legislation, but to actually be somebody who is willing to work with the other members, even if you have to burnish it down in the process to get across that there are going to be some red lines associated with me and why I am here. That is not what I am seeing. So yeah, these videos are cute. What matters is that people are not getting $15 an hour. That's the thing that burns. Videos are cute. Like, share, and of course, subscribe. Thanks, guys.